Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our first panel for today, which is dedicated to gendered experiences of the Holocaust, women's voices. And it's my pleasure to introduce our chair for today, Michael L. Miller. Michael L. Miller is an associate professor in the Nationalism Studies program at Central European University in Budapest/Vienna and co-founder of its Jewish Studies program. He received his BA from Brown University, where he specialized in European history and Old World archaeology and art. He received his PhD in history from Columbia University, where he specialized in Jewish and Central European history. His research focuses on the impact of nationality conflicts on the religious, cultural, and political developments of Central European Jewry in the 19th and 20th centuries. His articles have appeared in Slavic Review, Austrian History Yearbook, the Simon Dubnow Institute Yearbook, Multe Jövő, and the Jewish Quarterly Review. Miller's book, Rabbis and the Revolution, The Jews of Moravia in the Age of Emancipation, was published by Stanford University Press in 2011, and he is one of the authors of Zwischen Prag und Nikolsburg, Leben in den böhmischen Ländern, which was published by Vandenhoek and Ruprecht in 2019, and it will appear this year in English as Prague and Beyond, Jews in the Bohemian Lands. Michael, thanks for being here with us today.
Thank you, Miriam, for the introduction, and thank you, Eva, for the invitation. I appreciate the irony that this is a panel on women's voices, and the first voice that you're hearing is a man's voice. I would like to invite Justina Smalkyté to come up to the podium. Justina is a PhD candidate at the Center for History at Sciences Po in Paris, where she is preparing a dissertation on materiality, space, objects, and bodies in anti-Nazi resistance movements in German-occupied Lithuania. She holds a double MA in European History from Paris Diderot University and Humboldt University of Berlin, and a BA in History from Viennese University. Her research has been supported by research grants of the Sciences Po Graduate School, the Association for the Advancement of Baltic Studies, and the Moshe Mirilashvili Center for Research on the Holocaust in the Soviet Union at Yad Vashem. Her talk today is titled Gender and Materiality in Jewish Anti-Nazi Resistance in German-Occupied Lithuania, Sources and Research Problems.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for this kind introduction, and thank you for conference organizers for having me here in Vienna. I'm really glad to be able to present my research here. So, my talk today focuses on Jewish anti-Nazi resistance in German-occupied Lithuania between 1941 and 1944, a topic that I approach through the lens of material culture studies. I have divided this short talk into three parts. So, firstly, I will briefly discuss the historical background of Jewish resistance in Lithuania, and then I will say a few words about why I find materiality a well-suited approach to study anti-Nazi resistance and what primary sources allow me to analyze the material lives of Jewish partisans. I will finish my talk with some considerations about what material things can tell us about social relations and ethnic hierarchies within the communist resistance in Lithuania. So the goal of this presentation is to ask what kind of insights can be gleaned about Jewish experiences, both those of women and men in the anti-Nazi resistance in German-occupied Lithuania, by exploring the materiality of the everyday life in the partisan camps. Okay, so a few words about the context. In July 1941, a month after the beginning of the Barbarossa campaign, the Nazis set up a civilian occupation regime in Lithuania. The pre-1941 Lithuanian territories became the Generalbezirk Litauen, which was a part of the Reichskommissariat Ostland. You can see it on the map in the blue. To avoid a sort of methodological nationalism in the context of my presentation, I refer to Lithuania not as to a nation state, obviously, but as to a German administrative territory. So just a few words about the Holocaust in Lithuania and the resistance. In Lithuania, the German occupation resulted in the nearly total annihilation of the pre-war Lithuanian Jewish population of 208,000 individuals. And actually, unlike urban Jews in major cities, where the ghettos prevailed until 1943 and 1944, such as it was in the case of Šiauliai, Kauno, and Vilna ghettos, 100,000 Jews living in province towns and villages were murdered by the Nazis and their local collaborators within a short period of 3 months following the German invasion. So it means that basically, Jews who joined anti-Nazi resistance, they came only from the ghettos, and they joined the resistance between 1942 and 1943. According to the estimations provided by Lithuanian historian Rimantas Zizas, roughly 4,000 Red partisans operated in the Generalbezirk Litauen. About 70% of them were Jews, and 38% were Slavs of Russian, Belarusian, and Ukrainian origins, and 35% were ethnic Lithuanians. So let's move to this question of material culture and what this kind of approach allows me to do with my primary sources. So actually, one of the reasons why I examine I just realized that I could take this off and perhaps it would be easier for you to listen to me. So one of the reasons why I examine anti-Nazi resistance from the perspective of everyday history and material culture studies, so it means by paying certain attention to construction of hideouts and bunkers, bodily experiences of hunger and pain, food sharing among partisans, and many other things, is a sort of willingness to highlight the fact that these historical actors were very human, products of the pre-war and wartime society with all the accompanying flaws and glories. My second argument comes from literary scholar Božena Šalkros and her understanding of the relationship between Nazism and the material object world. So Šalkros argues that the Holocaust, with its agenda of human extermination, promoted a fetishization of objects. The acts of looting, amassing, and sorting gave unprecedented centrality to the fragmented material object world. So I find her observation especially enlightening when it comes to theorizing empirical studies of the Nazi policies of looting, dispossession, and war economy. But I also think that it is useful to extend this observation to the context of anti-Nazi resistance, because after all, the practices of looting, hiding, and combat also highlight the centrality of anti-Nazi activities and practices. So in my research, I examined various partisan objects like boots, jackets, bags, watches, weapons, food, and human bodies themselves. I think that if we take the anthropological dictum according to which objects mean different things to different people, quite seriously, it also means that material things are important sources reflecting people's cultural preferences and political, social, and economic structures within which they exist. I have this quote from Rachel Margolis, a female Jewish partisan who fought the Nazis in an ethnically mixed partisan unit in Generalbezirk Litauen. And I think it illustrates my point really very well. Quote, Chaim was suffering. The rough kersey boots, which had overjoyed him at first, had rubbed his feet raw, and he, with others in the group, could not even wind foot clothes around them. Their poor guys were walking around like invalids. They were in torment for a long time, for months. There weren't enough bandages or ointment, and people were exhausted from the constant undernourishment. Josie's skating boots saved me, the same ones I had begun the journey with. They were broken in and comfortable. I was able to walk in them until the following spring. So what is interesting in her memoir is that the word boots is mentioned 34 times, more than the words fascism or communism. So of course it's obviously not to say that ideology did not matter, but it's more about switching the focus from the content of partisans' political discourses to the experiences of war and anti-Nazi resistance. This short quote from Rachel Margolis' memoir also shows the meaning that a pair of leather boots could gain in the conditions of extreme scarcity, raw weather conditions, and constant undernourishment. Margolis' words also remind us of the fact that clothes and other sartorial signs are an extension of the body. In this example, instead of improving combatant performance of the partisans, badly fit boots made everyday bodily experiences in the forest very painful. And also, as in numerous other Jewish testimonies, social differentiation in the partisan camps appears as a significant social feature of the partisan community. In fact, a sort of elite class was formed out of partisan commanders who had a privileged access to rare material goods. So it was, of course, in a strike contrast with the communist ideals promoted by the leftist and anti-fascist resistance. And in this context, Jewish partisans, and especially women, often felt like they were issued second-class objects, including older and fewer weapons, of course. Those two objects that I want to talk about, weapons and a leather satchel carried by partisans in Lithuania. Firstly, some words regarding weapons. There was an important symbolic meaning attached to the weapon. The privilege to bear a rifle was accorded not to everyone. Many Jewish partisans had to fight for it while negotiating the uneasy relationship between partisan commanders and non-Jewish partisans, holding ethnic stereotypes against the Jews. There are some sources showing that partisan commanders disapproved anti-Semitism among rank-and-file partisans. Numerous reports and memoirs indicate that non-Jewish partisans often considered the Jews as inferior combatants to Slavs and Lithuanians. Moreover, Jewish partisans in Lithuania were not only a religiously and ethnically distinct group, they also often differed in their social upbringing and education. Predominantly urban and often more educated than other partisans, Jewish combatants were often stereotyped as weak urban folks lacking courage to fight. So obviously it was uneasy for Jewish partisans to contest those emasculating stereotypes of Jewish passivity in the face of the Holocaust. And wartime and post-war partisan sources indicate that Jewish partisans often volunteered for risky military operations. And I interpret this taking part in the violence against German policemen, local collaborators, and hostile peasants as a sort of possibility to contest the emasculating stereotype of Jewish passivity in the face of the Holocaust. So as female combatants of all ethnic backgrounds, Jewish partisans, whether male or female, had to prove their readiness to perform violence in order to disapprove ethnic and gender stereotypes. Then the bag is also an amazing source into the inner lives of the partisans. The satchel can contain the most private and intimate objects carried by partisans, such as letters to the loved ones, one or two family photographs, often a newspaper in Yiddish or in Russian. The things partisans carried give a glimpse at the complex inner worlds of their owners. However, material objects that are part of various Holocaust museums' collections are complex sources. The meanings and uses they had during the war are closely intertwined with their status today as memorial objects of museum collections. For instance, as many echo documents of partisans published decades after the war, the meanings are affected by the dominant cultural and political regimes. Their quality as three-dimensional material things requires a set of methodological tools to be investigated properly. Also, in many cases, I can only access those objects via their photographic reproductions. And there are also some methodological questions deriving from the use of written sources in order to have access to the materiality of the objects. In this next image, which is a drawing of a former partisan and inhabitant of the Vilna ghetto, Alexander Bogan, eating in a partisan camp is portrayed as a social ritual, a collective moment that has the potential to strengthen the process of voting. As eating and food sharing are the moments that enable to understand to whom people felt close, those kind of sources also provide a glimpse into what kind of sub-communities partisans established while operating in the partisan camps. My last example is partisan writing. I use the term precarium, which is, of course, in direct link with the theme of the conference, and which also comes from literary scholar Božena Šalkros. So I use this term to define the content and the form of such texts because of the incriminating message they convey and their material fragility. For example, some texts were written on a piece of tobacco paper, not only because other writing materials were unavailable, but also because this form allowed couriers to swallow the messages in case of perceived danger. On the slide, you can see some examples of such partisan messages written on a tobacco paper. In this case, those are on the protocols of Lithuanian Communist Party of 1943. So in my research, this fragility of material objects and the story of their survival are somehow more important than their actual content. And in fact, these objects, texts, can help to write a less organization-centered history of the resistance. The focus on materiality may bring us to the questions of couriers' experiences of moving from one space to another, also experiences of hiding or passing as Aryans. I therefore find the dialogue between anthropologically informed theories on material things and empirical research in the Holocaust and resistance studies really very stimulating. For me, it helps to analyze Soviet-era testimonies, and there is one example of such testimonies, of former partisans and other communist material, which actually use very standardized language and have a strong political bias. But however, those documents also contain relevant details about everyday life in partisan camps and are extremely valuable sources for exploring everyday life in partisan camps. And in this case, we have a testimony of Chaya Livshikaite, which was taken in 1956. And it uses this very standardized communist language, but at the same time, there are interesting glimpses in the everyday life in the partisan camps. And she also tells the story of her baby that she gave to a Gentile couple living in Vilna, and we do not have a lot of details about it. We do not have, we cannot understand from her testimony the state of her emotion. We cannot understand her emotional state, for instance, but we understand certain silences, the things that she does not want to provide in her testimony, and this is also very telling, of course. And the last thing that I want to talk about very briefly is the question of corporeality. The war and anti-Nazi resistance in the partisan camps marks a certain homogenization in the way men and women of different ethnic and social backgrounds experienced their own corporeality. If before the war, intellectuals and professional soldiers, let's say, lived very differently through their bodies, the irregular war narrowed the pre-war differences substantially, as feelings of hunger, illness, combat, and exhaustion became a commonly shared partisan experience. This being said, of course, there were some important ethnic and gender-based differences in the way partisans experienced their own corporality. And I also have one more quote from Rachel Margolis. Quote, "The rains hammered us like artillery. Our shoes were soaked and we had no change of clothing. We had thrown away everything that we brought with us, underwear, socks, scarves, while breaking through the encirclement. Lice showed up, first in our hair, then on our clothes. There was no point in even mentioning a bath. Our skin had acquired a greenish-brown tint from the smoke. Our clothes were worn out, our faces covered with soot. We did not look like ourselves." So, firstly, in terms of gender, female partisans lived differently in their bodies on the level of hygiene and sexuality. As historians Masha Tsarovich and Ruf Lizerovich showed in the case of Belarusian and Lithuanian partisan groups, respectively, women often suffered from what we call today sexual harassment. Also, in some cases, women infected with venereal diseases could be executed by their fellow comrades. On the other hand, it was widely assumed that women were less suspect for resistance activities than their male counterparts. This was the underlying reason why many women were recruited as couriers for the communist underground. For instance, when arrested by the Gestapo, the courier Lucia Lubauskaite used a gendered stereotype of a young, naive, and unpolitical mother to convince about her innocence. Several other partisan sources indicate that female resistors often relied on such subversive use of conventional conceptions about femininity. So, to sum up, with this short talk, I just wanted to share some considerations about why to place objects in the center of an inquiry of Jewish minority in the anti-fascist resistance in Lithuania might be a fruitful scholarly endeavor. And I believe that food, weapons, and partisans' bodies, of course, can tell many things about social differentiation in the camps, in the partisan camps, ethnic relations in the anti-fascist resistance, and of course, gender differences of partisan experiences. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Justina. We'll get to the discussion on this paper together with the discussion of Lauren's paper and Nathaniel's paper at the end of the session. And I'm now very happy to introduce our third and last panelist, Nathaniel Parker Weston, who earned his PhD in German history from the University of Washington. His master's thesis examined discourses on Jewish identity in the life and work of the Viennese author Hugo Bettauer. His dissertation analyzed the construction of race and nationalism in German colonial anthropologies. He's an instructor of history at Seattle Central College, where he is preparing a course on Holocaust history and memory. He has also taught classes on the Holocaust, modern Germany, and European history at the University of Washington. He is currently working on a study of Holocaust survivors in post-war Vienna based on their care and maintenance forms, documents which allowed them to obtain status as displaced persons by the International Relief Organization, making them eligible for material support and possible resettlement. And this will be the topic of today's paper, Early Holocaust Testimonies and the Prospects for Microhistory, a Viennese Woman's Care and Maintenance Form.
Thank you very much. This presentation analyzes the care and maintenance form of Paula Bettauer, who completed it in Vienna in 1950 as an application to the International Refugee Organization for assistance with resettlement to the United States. The CM1 forms are available through the online archive of the International Tracing Service and include applicants' personal statements, chronologies of work histories, and lists of vital documents, as well as other biographical information. Although some provide more details than others,
Can you hear us okay?
We can't.
this presentation will first use Paula Bettauer's CM1.
Nathaniel, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. You can't hear me?
We lost your sound for about a minute, so if you could maybe go back to the previous document. Can you go back to the previous document? Yeah, and maybe go back to where you were about a minute ago, because we missed all of that.
Of Paula Bettauer, who completed it in Vienna in 1950 as an application to the International Refugee Organization for assistance with resettlement to the United States. CM1 forms are available through the online archive of the International Tracing Service and include applicants' personal statements, chronologies of work histories, and lists of vital documents, as well as other biographical information. Although some provide more details than others, each operates as an early testimony that promises the possibility for a microhistory. There are nearly 3,000 such applications from Vienna, and several of them were completed by female survivors, thus offering insight into their experiences and memories of the Holocaust. This presentation will first use Paula Bettauer's CM1 form as the basis for a brief history of her life before, during, and after the Holocaust. It will then examine examples of other Viennese women's CM1 forms to show other possibilities for microhistories. Her CM1 form indicates that she was born Paula Blum in Vienna in 1908. It also lists her birth certificate issued by the Jewish community of Vienna among her vital documents. Just beneath it, noted parenthetically and in smaller script, the form states that she was baptized in December 1934. It does not include a baptismal certificate in the list of documents, but it could have been lost during the war like numerous other personal effects from the Nazi era. Blum attended primary school in Vienna during the years of the Great War, 1914 to 1918. She attended secondary school from 1918 to 1921 and trade school from 1921 to 1923 in the early years of the First Austrian Republic. It is unclear what took place in her life over the following decade. She was married in 1933 and, as stated above, baptized the next year. National Socialism had been a formidable movement within Austria before the Nazi annexation in 1938, launching an unsuccessful putsch in 1934 that resulted in the death of Chancellor Engelbert Dollfuss. This could have motivated Frau Bettauer's conversion in hopes that it would afford her greater protection than others of Jewish ancestry should Nazism eventually take hold in the country. Her baptism also could have presented more social and economic opportunities for her in Austria, where anti-Semitism was widespread even before the Anschluss. On the first page of the CM1 form, where the applicant writes her religion, it shows the word Jewish struck through and replaced by RC for Roman Catholic. Yet later on the form, just above her personal statement, it notes Austrian Jewish woman. Indeed, she was both Jewish and Christian, but certain tensions seemed to surface between them that were not fully resolved. That she had been persecuted for her Jewish ancestry was a crucial aspect of her application, though she also appeared to wish that it be known that Catholicism was her confession of choice, asserting it on the form in the post-war era as if in opposition to the Nazi project of racializing and essentializing her and others into an immutable category. Frau Bettauer's employment history indicates that she worked at home from 1933 until obtaining a position as a state welfare insurance official in 1936, earning 500 shillings per month there until she was dismissed from her job due to her Jewish ancestry. She then endured several months of unemployment before she was able to find some odd jobs at significantly reduced wages beginning in September 1939. Frau Bettauer worked as a caregiver for 9 months at 100 shillings per month before becoming an errand girl for the same wages for nearly 2 years between May 1940 and February 1942. To this, she supplemented her income by working as a washerwoman, also for 100 shillings per month, for 7 months during 1940. In her study of Jewish Germans under Nazi rule before the Second World War, Marion Kaplan shows that many Jewish women became the primary breadwinners in their households due to Jewish men's job losses. It is unclear if the same situation was at large in Frau Bettauer's household. The CM1 form does not indicate, but it is certainly possible. Besides losing her job due to her Jewish ancestry, the CM1 form shows in the list of documents that Frau Bettauer was issued a Jewish identity card in October 1939. These forms of identification were marked with an enormous letter J, designating the racial status of Jewish people in Germany, Austria, and the annexed portion of Czechoslovakia, according to Nazi anti-Semitic policy. Frau Bettauer needed this ID card to travel through Vienna to and from her places of employment and elsewhere. A peculiar item stands out in her employment history, namely, that she worked in October 1940 at the Sperlgasse immigration camp, as she described it. This is odd because this was the name of an assembly camp where Jewish Austrians were deported from Vienna, but only beginning in 1941. Prior to then, it was, and is again today, a school. Following the Anschluss, it became a school exclusively for Jewish children. It is possible that Frau Bettauer worked at the school and that she described it by what it would become later, using a euphemism in calling it an emigration camp. It still seems strange that she did not refer to it as a school and that she would only work there for a month, but it may further illustrate the instability of regular employment for Jewish people under the Nazi regime. A document also from October 1940 shows that Frau Bettauer sought to leave Austria. It was an affidavit from New York. As Ilana Fritz Offenberger writes in her study of Jewish Austrians in Vienna under Nazi rule, in order to register for a visa, one needed a financial guarantor in the USA to send an official written statement, an affidavit, to the consulate or the IKG on one's behalf. By the following month, November 1940, Frau Bettauer was once again unemployed. It is not clear how or if this affected her ability to immigrate to the United States. Nonetheless, the list of documents section of her CM1 form also contains a booking certificate from Lisbon to New York, dated the 12th of June, 1941, issued by a travel agency in Leipzig. So obviously she took at least one additional step toward leaving the country. A different document listed on her CM1 form points to the possibility that Frau Bettauer may have narrowly escaped deportation from Vienna. A discharge certificate from the Sperlgasse assembly camp dated October 1942 appears as the last item on her list of documents. According to the Documentation Center of the Austrian Resistance, by October 1942, more than 48,000 Jewish Austrians had been deported from Vienna. Between November 1940 and January 1943, Frau Bettauer had been without work altogether. She then went underground beginning in January 1943. She hid in various places, her employment history indicated, before she was liberated in April 1945. In addition to shedding some light on Frau Bettauer's life navigating the Nazi era in Vienna, her personal statement described the demise of her husband. She explained that he was the son of the author Hugo Bettauer, transported to Poland from Belgium, where he was hiding in a convent, and that he was subsequently gassed in Auschwitz. It is fascinating that she did not refer to her husband by name, but rather via his father, the Viennese author Hugo Bettauer. He had published the novel Die Stadt ohne Juden in 1922, which played out the anti-Semitic fantasy of expelling the Jewish inhabitants of Vienna. When the city falls into extreme economic and cultural ruin, however, the authorities must invite the exiles back. Certain aspects of the book are ominous today, despite Bettauer's satirical intent, such as his description of the deportation of the remaining Jewish population of Vienna. He wrote that, with the use of all means of transport, with the help of locomotives that were borrowed from neighboring states, with the cessation of every other passenger and freight transport, the last Jews were taken away in 30 gigantic trains that day. Hugo Bettauer was also a supporter of sexual liberation and women's rights, even proclaiming the erotic revolution in the first issue of a lifestyles and eroticism magazine he published, a position that put him in direct conflict with the Austrian Nazis and others on the far right. He was ultimately murdered in 1925, shot to death by a young National Socialist, becoming the first victim of the Nazis in Austria. Paula Bettauer, describing her late husband as the author's son, underscored the sense of loss that she and her family had endured for nearly 25 years. Frau Bettauer managed to obtain a position after the war as the business director of a movie theater for 1,000 shillings per month, double her salary as a state insurance official here.
We lost you again.
Anti-Semitism today.
Nathaniel, we lost you for about 10.
Double her salary.
Yeah, double her salary.
In what must have seemed like another cruel repetition of the past, however, she explained in her personal statement that she held the job through the end of 1949, but was let go due to prevailing anti-Semitism today, which was preventing her from obtaining another position as well. Although initially after liberation, she had begun to pick up the pieces of her shattered life, Frau Bettauer now seemed to find herself in almost the exact same position as the immediate aftermath of the Nazi annexation. Now in the post-war era, her struggles with the past were evident in her personal statement. "The memory of my husband's murder keeps haunting me," she remarked. Frau Bettauer explained further that, "I would also like my parents to know a country where they can enjoy a peaceful retirement," and she concluded, "not with the racial uncertainty like that which prevails in Austria." The information taken from her CM1 form shows several impacts of the Holocaust on an Austrian Jewish woman. Following the Nazi annexation of Austria, she lost her job as a state welfare insurance official, and then she worked several stints at different jobs for significantly reduced wages. She eventually sought to immigrate to the United States, but was unable to. Her husband fled the country only to be discovered hiding in a monastery in Belgium, and subsequently deported to Auschwitz, where he was immediately gassed to death. Frau Bettauer went into hiding, remaining there until the end of the war. After the liberation, she began to rebuild, securing a job as a business director of a movie theater, but this position was lost too, the result of anti-Semitism that still prevailed in the post-war period. She again attempted to relocate to the United States, but now with her parents. Frau Bettauer was again unable to emigrate, however. She passed away from cancer in 1951. These documents had the potential to serve as the basis of microhistories with extraordinary details about victims' experiences. Other CM1 forms from Vienna show women escaping Austria for various European countries, Palestine and Shanghai, going into hiding or surviving deportation to Theresienstadt, Auschwitz, Ravensbrück, Flossenburg, Mauthausen, and other camps. Like Frau Bettauer's, many also include information about the losses of Viennese women's loved ones in the Holocaust. The remaining part of this presentation looks at the experiences of 3 women from Vienna. Similar to Bettauer, Sabine went underground, but did so after fleeing Austria for Belgium. She was born in Cedero in the Galicia region of the Habsburg Empire in 1905 before becoming an Austrian citizen in her youth. She attended primary, secondary, and trade school in Vienna and fled the country after the Nazi annexation to Antwerp in April 1939 with her husband and 6-year-old daughter. Following the German invasion and occupation of Belgium in May 1940, her husband was interned. Frau Steinmann was eventually compelled to flee Antwerp for Brussels in March 1942 and live under a false identity until January 1944. She was ultimately caught at the Malines concentration camp during most of 1944.
I think we can just read along with him.
It is also not known what became of her daughter when Frau Steinmann was held in Malines. It is possible that both mother and daughter were imprisoned there. Both returned to Vienna after the war, and the two filed their CM1 form together, although most of the biographical information centers on Frau Steinmann. Gertrude Steiner was born in Vienna in 1908 and attended primary and secondary school there before becoming a cosmetician. After the Nazi annexation of Austria, she stopped working and lost her home in 1939 due to her Jewish ancestry. Frau Steiner was then forced to move to a living quarters shared with 19 others. She became a volunteer nurse at the Jewish Community Hospital in Vienna in 1940, which spared her from deportation to Poland in 1941. She continued working as a nurse in the Jewish Community Hospital until 1942, when she was deported to Theresienstadt with her parents. Her father eventually died in the camp. Frau Steiner managed to get married there in February 1944, though without a legal ceremony, but her husband was sent to Auschwitz and then taken to Dachau, where he perished. Her mother was also sent to Auschwitz in 1944, and she ultimately died there. Frau Steiner was deported. Lieselotte Walden was born in Vienna in 1916. She attended school there as well as in London. She fled with her mother to Hungary in 1943 to avoid deportation to Poland. Both were interned in Hungary, and then she became a nurse. Following the German occupation of Hungary in March 1944, her mother was deported to Auschwitz in July and perished in the camp. During the German occupation of Hungary, Frau Walden lived underground, but she was forced to flee the country in July 1944 when her mother was deported. She returned to Vienna, where she again lived in hiding.
Nathaniel, you have around,
she was soon captured by the Gestapo,
3 minutes left.
2 minutes?
3 minutes.
And then deported in December 1944 to the Ravensbrück concentration camp for women north of Berlin. Frau Walden managed to survive and return to Vienna in June 1945. Each of the women discussed above filled out their CM1 forms themselves. In other instances, families, including husbands and wives, filled them out jointly. In the latter case, it was the husband who furnished the personal statement, though the form often still included information about the wife. To get a better sense of women's voices reflecting on their lives before, during, and after the Holocaust, it is best to examine CM1 forms completed by women, therefore. Looking at the lives of individual women when possible helps reveal aspects of the Holocaust that cannot otherwise be understood. As Saul Friedlander explains in his prize-winning study of the Holocaust, it is at this micro level that the most basic and ongoing Jewish interaction with the forces acting in the implementation of the final solution took place. It is at this micro level that it mostly needs to be studied, and it is at this micro level that documents abound. The CM1 forms allow a partial reconstruction of the experiences of women survivors, which in themselves illustrate various levels of the Nazi genocide. Ultimately, these documents show that the Jewish women in Vienna possessed valuable knowledge of the Holocaust in the years immediately following the war, and information about their lives still illuminates vital aspects of this history. Despite their often cursory and fragmented structures, several CM1 forms completed by female Jewish survivors in Vienna contain extraordinary details about their experiences. Grasping the machinery of genocide is essential, but it is best accompanied by the voices of those whom it sought to crush beneath it. The CM1 forms, written by women, Holocaust survivors, begin to offer this possibility. And I'll end it there. I think there's one more slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you for 3 fascinating and I think also heartbreaking and in some cases disturbing presentations, which dealt with different kinds of post-war voices, video testimonies, written memoirs, these bureaucratic documents that we just heard. And I'm going to ask Justina maybe to sit at this table over here, one down from me. And we will take questions first from the audience, and then we'll have some questions online. So Natalia, and then Ari, and then Sonia. And we'll take these 3 questions together, and then we'll move on.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for a great panel. I have 3 questions. And then a question to Justina. Thank you very much. So I'm fascinated by this project. I'm looking forward to seeing more of it and reading more of it. I'm wondering about Jewish objects. You talked about social stratification, and I would argue that a lot of those partisan stuffs are forest stuffs. I mean, not guns, obviously, but this is about urban people living in a forest. If you could comment on this, but in particular, if you see things Jewish, objects that are Jewish taken into the forest and functioning in that forest, again, they are gendered by definition. And to Nathaniel, I'm sorry I missed the very beginning of your presentation, so it's possible that I'm here being completely annoying, but if you could talk a little bit about the CMI form as such, as a kind of a source. We've seen a lot of forms yesterday talked about, and then the second question is what makes it women's voices? I mean, how are male Jewish survivors filling these forms different in what they tell us? But thank you for a great panel again. And I think Ari, you are next.
Okay. So I'll speak to the camera again. So yeah, I have 2 questions, and 2 for the people who are online. And then I had it's a mix of a question and a comment for Nathaniel. Actually, sort of connecting to so just the question for me is why you think that these people filled out the forms themselves. That is, you can see the typewriter in these forms. If you've been to an official office, you know you never type anything up yourself if you give them a police report about something. These files are International Refugee Organization files. Yesterday, I think we saw a brief image of the eligibility manual. The actual archive of the IRO is in Paris, in the Archives Nationales, where you can see who actually works at these offices, from the secretary they would meet when they enter the office, to the translator, to the officer who makes the decision. That's the person signing to. Somebody translated this partially into English, in fact, as one could see. But that is for Bettauer. We saw the image. So it's probably a conversation you're having between multiple people, and that's the trace we see. So that's why I guess it's more of a comment. I wonder how you can, the question would be, how do we reread these, considering that this is a negotiation between somebody who's telling a story, again, as we heard yesterday, also regarding dig-up files and these, based on what you know you're supposed to be saying. By 1950, you sure were advised on what you're supposed to say if you want that ticket from the IRO to the US. They pay their fare under certain conditions. and an officer who has their ideas of what is relevant. Did she not say who her husband was? Was the officer just into Hugo Bettauer? We don't know. So I wonder what you make of that how should I put it? Yeah, the collaborative character of any CM1 file or TD file for that matter, or the other files you can find in the ITS database.
Okay, and we'll take Sonia's question, and then we'll get some answers, and then we'll take a second round with Michal and whoever is online.
So Sonia Gollins, UCL. So for Justina, my question is actually very closely related to Natalia's. I was reminded, like especially with the excerpt related to boots, about how in the film version of All Quiet on the Western Front, where boots are this sort of recurring motif. And so I was completely convinced by your presentation about the importance of these material objects for thinking about Jewish partisans. But I was wondering to what extent you were thinking about sort of the uniqueness or the specificity of the material objects of these partisans in how they compared with other sorts of wartime situations and other sorts of studies of material objects. Thank you.
So thank you so much for your questions, Natalia and Sonia. I will address both of them at the same time. So regarding Jewish objects, I do not have many sources on Jewish objects, so nothing on religious objects, for instance, but I do have something on Yiddish press and also poems. So those were not perhaps particularly, when it comes to poems, particularly Jewish objects, but they were written in Yiddish, and as far as I get from my sources, only some Jewish poets wrote poems, and no Lithuanian or Ukrainian or Belarusian poets in the camps, in the partisan camps. What else about particularity of Jewish objects? Also sometimes, and especially when it comes to the Jews coming from the Kovno ghetto, they got better objects, better boots or better jackets than other partisans, because the ghetto existed until 1944, so it was one of the last ghettos in Europe, and there were ghetto factories that manufactured different kind of objects. So resistance got some very valuable, very, very necessary objects from those factories. So this was also a sort of slight difference. And regarding the boots, yes, of course, you are absolutely right, Sonia. There are some overlappings when it comes to the First World War and, all the... in the Second World War in general, so it's not particularly Jewish, or even Soviet partisan experience. But what also interests me in this case, when it comes to the boots, is the fact that there is something involved about getting boots. For instance, getting boots from a dead enemy, right? So you have to take them off. You have to kind of turn a human body, a subject, into an object when you have to take a jacket, a weapon, and boots. So this kind of anthropological part of the story interests me a lot as well.
Thank you. And Nathaniel, we're short on time, so if you could answer as briefly as possible. Unmute it, please.
Thank you. The CM1 forms, as the gentleman indicated, were a kind of a ticket to be able to immigrate. So they were about proving that you had been persecuted. Many people don't get support. They don't get the material aid. So just as far as sources are concerned, the sources, the goal of the source is to show what had happened to you. And that would then lead to a decision being made that you could receive aid to leave the country. As far as it being a collaborative document, I mean, I think that's utterly evident, and it's a little bit hard to tell how that operates, but you can take the essence from it. Yeah, no, I mean, the point about why doesn't she mention her husband, I mean, I think there is something there. I mean, her husband has passed away, and she is actually about to get remarried. And then, of course, I mentioned just kind of slightly, she passes away. So she doesn't get remarried, but then her husband was a survivor too, and he is filling out his own form. So I think she didn't want to sort of have, she wanted to have her discrete application exist as it stood on its own. I think the difference between the women's and the men's is subtle, but just kind of the material that they address on their own is involves oftentimes their families more. They attend to their families more. They discuss their families more, and it's perhaps because they're embedded in that setting more than men. But men talk about themselves, and then women talk about themselves a little. But also their families more. So that's one kind of thing to note. But I think just as I continue to go through them, right, I mean, going through 3,000 of them and still going through them, more will emerge, and just as I do more research. So I appreciate the questions, and I appreciate being able to be on the panel with others. Thank you.
Now we're going to take one last question.
Yeah, thank you so much. I have two questions to Justina. As we know, Hakarad wrote extensively on Latvian Jewish partisans and Lithuanian, and then in 70s, 80s at Yad Vashem there were many conferences and about Jewish resistance and published articles. So I'm curious to what extent you feel that you continue this sort of tradition of writing, considering that you write in French and in France, where such tradition didn't exist. And the second question is about Litvako's community. If you found any evidence about connection, participation in partisan movements of Litvakos, and if yes, then please elaborate about subjects, objects connected to this community. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, for your questions. Those are very broad ones, so I guess we will have a chance to talk about it later today. So I will just say a few words regarding existing scholarship on Jewish resistance in Latvia, Belarus, Lithuania. So, of course, I'm very much inspired by the scholarship. But at the same time, it's really interesting to do this research in France, where there is a dominant discourse when it comes to resistance. In France, we have La Résistance, right? So it's a very, very well-established field of study. So I can also take some theoretical insights from French scholars, and not necessarily to adapt them, like directly to my research, but just to, to see different points of view, different kind of theorizations also. What is resistance? Well, and how do we define it? Yeah, so I think that's all.
And Nathaniel, if you have a final word.
Just I agree with the point about discourse. These are women's discourses in the CM1 forms, and it's important to try to establish just what are those discourses like, and how do they differ? Are they different? They are different, and so I think I just agree with what Eva was saying. So, thank you.
So thank you to all the presenters and the audience for a wonderful session.
Thank you, everyone. We will take a 15 minutes coffee break now, and we have coffee and also a bit of snacks prepared in the 4th floor, and then we will regather here. Maybe we can do at 25 past. Let's try that. Thank you.